Today's show is sponsored by Indie Film Hustle TV, the world's first streaming service dedicated to filmmakers, screenwriters, and content creators.
I was conscious in my mother's womb. On one side, I wanted to express myself as a human being. Yet, on the other side, I didn't, because I felt I was spirit.
Yogananda happens to be what I would call a spiritual prodigy.
Steve Jobs apparently had only one book on his iPad, The Autobiography of a Yogi.
The LA Times called him the first superstar guru of the 20th century.
Through this body, many shall receive the spiritual enlightenment of India.
God is taking me away to America.
Yogananda arrives in Los Angeles, and on the first night, over 6,000 people attend his talk.
Yogananda came and brought us a truth, a universal truth that no one can escape.
Here is a small, brown mystic from a nation that very few Americans had ever been to. And he is here delivering his message with such force that he's making converts by the thousands. He was put on a government watch list and kept under surveillance. There was literally a war against yoga being waged in the media.
I am going through the severest trial of my life.
Yoga has become something that you do with your body, but it's really about the mind. Yogananda said that there was a secret link between the body and the spirit.
The technique of meditation, recharging the body battery with cosmic energy, for it is not a creed or dogma, but the science of the soul and spirit.
If I hadn't read that, I'd just be, some horrible person.
While he was writing the autobiography, we set off the first atomic bomb. The need for the teachings was more urgent than ever.
He always said, the man who can reform himself can reform the world.
The physical world is not the highest reality. There's something beyond that that we can partake of.
I'd like to welcome to the show Peter and Paola, documentary filmmakers extraordinaire. Thanks for being on the show, guys.
Thanks for having us, Alex.
I am a huge fan of your work, specifically the movie Awake, which is one of the reasons why I wanted you to have on the show. Not only because of the topic of the movie and it being one of my favorite documentaries, but also the process of how you made it, how you got it out there, and we're going to go into all that kind of stuff. But before we get into that, first, how did you guys get into the film business in the first place?
Go ahead, Peter.
I got the bug in college. I was searching for what I wanted to do. It started like in physics and math. Then I went into economics. I thought that was going to be practical. And then I just took this one filmmaking class and the light bulb went off. It was like, oh my God, this is it. This is what I want to do my whole life. So then I just headed for Hollywood and then I met Paola.
And you guys work together, correct?
We do, and my background was really in the news with Italian television, and it was before that, when I was a kid, I was an actress, and so the whole idea of slipping into other people's shoes and seeing the world through other points of view has been, like, I think, a part of just who I am. And so the natural progression from short form to long form, and then really wanting to have a voice and tell the narrative. To really, storytelling in nonfiction, having a stronger narrative was what I was attracted to. That's what brought me to documentary films.
Now, how is it challenging working together as a couple? Because I had a business with my wife, and it was wonderful. But it's challenging. So how? And we weren't creative, so I could only imagine the discussions. So how is it working together how do you work together as a couple?
Divorce is not an option.
Well, what's fun about our story is that we made a film during our courtship. We actually met And we actually connected on the level of sort of Jungian archetypes. We were within our first 30 minutes of talking to each other, we were talking about Jungian archetypes, and it was like, okay, this girl is cool. And she had this burning desire to tell a story about expression, the need to find your voice as an artist and to express. And she had a perfect vehicle for this story, which is this violin virtuoso that Paola, you grew up with.
Mm-hmm. I grew up with not just Lerna Sonnenberg, who was a world-class violinist, and her mother was my piano teacher. And I just, was always far more interested in her than I was in my piano lessons. So that's kind of what spawned the idea of making my first independent film, Speaking in Strings. And I had just met Peter. Peter was a huge impetus for me actually diving into that. So I was working on it. I was trying to do it, but I was waiting for everything to be perfect, the funding to come in and all of that. And he's the one who just said, let me shoot this. I know how to shoot. I was like clapper loader for Dino De Laurentiis, let me do this. And I think we started out with just like Nacho was coming to town. I needed to take him up on his offer.
Sure.
And that's how we started first working together. But during the course of making that film, we were dating, and then we were traveling together. Then he popped the question, and then we had
all during that movie.
Yeah, all during the movie.
All during the making of Speaking in Strings, and then we went to Sundance.
You left out the marriage before having the baby.
Oh, right, you're right.
There was a wedding. There was a wedding in there. Then there was a baby, and then we're like, we got the baby and the baby Bjorn at Sundance at the Q&A.
No, I was pregnant at Sundance, but we brought Mateo, our first son, we brought around with us to, festivals, because he was, sleeping in a drawer and, just that kind of a thing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But because I was a big believer, in you just dive in, you just start, you can't wait. Nothing's perfect. It's never perfect.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we began that film on literally a little, consumer high-8 camera. It ended up, being nominated for an Academy Award.
I mean, God, that's amazing.
Yeah. Well, Peter's a hugely inspirational coach and teacher. Like I have to say, he's taught at Harvard and some other places, and he's just really, it's very inspirational. And so part of why I think it works for us to work together is that, it's just that helping to keep the inspiration alive in each other. So he loves the process of filmmaking, but he was a writer and I was a filmmaker, and I just, maybe was more like not as dive in, a little more insecure, a little bit trying to find my way. And here's this guy who's just like, dive in, let's do this. And, I'm going to do it with you, that kind of a thing. And I really did find my voice in the making of that film. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, Peter, when you said you took a film class early on, what made you go to documentary as opposed to narrative?
So I went to Harvard, which is the opposite of a film school.
I was about to say, I have not seen many Harvard film school grads that have taken.
They have this total bias towards documentaries, and not just documentaries. Okay. Highly personal documentaries. The joke was at Harvard, you had to make a film at Harvard, you had to grow a beard, do a personal documentary that involves the birth of one of your children, and make sure that you pan across a mirror as often as possible to show your beard. That is a Harvard documentary. And many people at Harvard were making those. In fact, Ross McElwee, Sherman's March, created that form with
seminal movie.
The diary cam. This was a movie that really transformed documentary filmmaking. He still teaches at Harvard. But there was a whole generation of us that really were kind of wanting to go to Hollywood and go to fiction, and we really wanted to make commercial movies, not these really, esoteric, artsy documentaries. So I started out on a fiction track, and I made some low-budget features as a director, did some music videos first, and then kind of fell into writing. It was sort of a dead end. This genre, low-budget, sort of AFM features were kind of like, do I really want to put my name on that? So I started writing, and I had beginner's luck. I sold my first script, and it became a big studio movie. And then I was kind of on that studio writing track, sort of the development hell writing track, until I met her. I basically got far away from what I had fallen in love with, which is actual hands-on filmmaking. You know, that's what I love is the actual, you know, I started out with film, cutting on, you know, on a steam bag.
Mm-hmm.
So when Paola and I met, she was like, you know, let's go to Sundance. Let's see real filmmaking. I'm like, yeah, let's do that. You know, so that was a breath of fresh air.
You guys seem to be very yin and yang for each other. Just by the small amount of time I've spent with you already and just this conversation, you guys seem to balance each other quite well.
The question is, who's the yang and who's the yin?
Well, that's a whole other question I will not get into right now.
It's out on Wednesday. You know, it just depends on the day.
Now, you guys did an amazing documentary called Awake, which is arguably one of my favorite documentaries of all time, and I watch it all the time. I told you this when I met you guys a while ago. And it's such a powerful film for me because I'm such a lover of Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda's work. Can you talk a little bit about how this film came into the world, why you decided to go down this path? And honestly, there hadn't been another documentary, if I'm not mistaken, correct, about his life?
No, but there have been many people that have gone to the SRF and to the organization to try to get the movie made. Mm-hmm. I think that, you know, what happened was that the direct disciples had been slowly passing away, and that firsthand information, you know, from those who actually lived with Yogananda while he was here in the flesh, was very important, and I think it was important historically as well as to his devotees. Mm-hmm. And you know, we made the film with Lisa Lehman, who co-directed and co-wrote with me, and co-produced with us. And you know, initially it wasn't. I mean, you know, when you make a film, you dive in and you're living, especially a documentary, you're living with the film for years. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that I certainly take lightly. And I wasn't really sure that this was something that I wanted to do until we were sitting in a room with the monastics. And I was very impressed with the people that we were sitting with. And there was just something that happened in the room. I don't really know how else to say it, except for it was exploratory for us, but impressed with them and impressed with something about the timing of Yogananda. You know, he brought Kriya Yoga.
Mm-hmm. Can you real quick before we continue, can you explain a little bit to the audience who Yogananda was? Because I know we all know who he is, but the audience might not know his work.
Sure. You want to take that?
Sure. So Yogananda is a Bengali Swami who was born in Calcutta in the 1890s and was the first sort of Hindu Swami to sort of move to America permanently. He lived here for 30 years. He arrived in 1920, and he brought basically yoga and meditation. He introduced it into America. There had been some other Swamis, but Yogananda was the guy who stayed here the longest and really was going town to town, you know, concert hall to concert hall, basically giving these free lectures on yoga. And this was the era before radio, before television. So there was not a lot, you know, it was actually kind of a thrilling thing to do, to go see the long-haired Swami with the turban, you know, talk about these exotic practices in the East. And, you know, he was so magnetic and so charismatic that he would just like electrify a room. There's a famous incident at Carnegie Hall where, you know, he actually got, 1,500 New Yorkers to chant with him for an hour in Sanskrit, you know, and he just, was doing his thing and really.
He brought these ancient teachings, he brought them and made them, practical in day-to-day life. He really gave how to live teachings, how to be the best businessman that you could be, how to live with maximum amounts of energy. He would take sort of daily, everyday challenges of being human, and he would apply the Sanatana Dharma teachings to that. And I think that that's what really hit home. But more importantly, he was teaching Kriya Yoga, which, is a type of yoga that works with energies in the spine. And, the idea of, he would say the altar of God is the brain, essentially the spine and brain is the altar of God. And what an interesting concept that we as human beings can, actually activate energies within the body that connect us to a higher power. And that is really true freedom and true independence. So the notion of that, it was easier to understand these concepts of energy being accessed like that and worked with because of what was happening in science at the time. And so quantum physics was coming into play, and this was a new idea. And so people were connecting what Yogananda's message was and what he had to say about Kriya Yoga, and it was making a little bit more sense. They were able to access it a little bit better because of what was really unfolding in science at the time.
And for everyone listening, you have to understand that this was what, the 20s?
Yeah.
I mean, because now everything you just said, he would fall right into a lot of the conversations that are happening there. But the way he looked back in the 20s, can you imagine? No one had ever seen.
It was head spinning.
It was head spinning. Exactly. Yeah. You talk about
even the notion of, he took Christ and Krishna and put them side by side on his altar and said, they're basically the same dude. They're two sides of the same coin, and he worshiped the divine in the form of the feminine, divine mother. That was also a radical concept. We were Christians, and we were, basically indoctrinated with this idea of this sort of bearded God with the lightning bolts, right. And that was your only access point. And in Vedanta, there's this very expansive notion of divinity. Divinity can just be a feeling. It can be the feeling of peace. That could be your God. You could cultivate devotion to whatever your point of entry is. It's a very attractive philosophy. And, Yogananda went on later in his life, in the 40s, he wrote this sort of seminal book, Autobiography of a Yogi, in which he talked about his own quest for his guru and as a boy and running around Calcutta and looking and searching and wanting to connect with this feeling that he, was longing for. And it's such a popular book. I mean, it's been translated into over 30 languages. I think 30 million people may have read it. And, one of the most famous is Steve Jobs. And he read that book all the time. And apparently it was the only book on his iPad at the time of his death. He also gave out 800 copies at his memorial service. So it's one of these gateway books that many, many people read.
And it also changed the Beatles' life as well, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Sure did.
George Harrison.
We wouldn't have had Sgt. Pepper, I think, without his visit to India, right? Or was it before or after?
Sgt. Pepper was before, but we wouldn't have had.
On the cover, right? You put the gurus on the cover.
Yogananda is on the cover of Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah, but it was before they went to India. Sgt. Pepper 67, they went to India in 68, but we wouldn't have, Across the Universe and Let It Be, All You Need Is Love, and all these exalted songs. Yes, we're part of the.
So you're taking this undertaking of telling the story of this immense figure in history. There's a lot of, I would imagine, a lot of pressure on you to do it right. I mean, there's people like you said, many filmmakers and many other people have tried to do this and gone to the Center of Self-Realization where it's basically the hub of all things Yogananda, and they've been rejected. So when you guys got the keys, let the lunatics run the asylum in a way, how did that feel? And again, why did you want to tell this story as a documentarian?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would say, funny, ignorance is bliss in this case, because I think, and to the credit of the organization who opened up their archives, I mean, they had to be a part of this because they had to open up their archives. And there were outside, devotees that had wanted to see the film made, right? And but they stipulated that it had to be outside filmmakers. So I thought that was really interesting. That was an entryway. That was certainly of interest to us. The fact that they were seeking outside filmmakers made it really attractive to us, so that there was an interest in sort of beginner's mind. And beginner's mind is a beautiful thing. You know, we don't have that anymore. We've been like, you know, deeply entrenched in his teachings now. And so it's a whole different thing. And I think that's what we were looking at. So we were filmmakers. We knew how to tell a story. We had a certain openness to this. We had been yoga practitioners, meditators, Lisa as well. You know, so we were all coming from a place of meditation and yoga being a part of our lives. But I think for me, this sort of yoga as a science, which is the way it's often seen, you know, in the East, I mean, that was very interesting to me, that there was this methodical approach to self-realization, that you could actually take, you know, these techniques and apply them to your life and do them. And just kind of see what happens, that you, the human being, was, you know, you were your own scientist and your body was your laboratory. And you could take these things and try them and, like an experiment, just notice and observe and see what was unfolding before you. So that was very attractive to me, especially given the times that we're living in right now. You know, I would say, it's so obvious that we are living out of balance on this planet. And it doesn't really matter what side of the aisle you're on. You know, it's almost like, you know, science and technology, we've advanced so much in that regard, but we haven't really balanced it out with our spiritual acumen. So yoga is really it's the science of balance. It's the sun and the moon. It's the energy of opposites. It's bringing balance into our lives and harnessing, you know, these energies brings the self to the highest self, right? What's the word I'm looking for? It's
transcends.
It transcends, exactly. It's it's transcendence. We can transcend the limitations of the body and of the mind in that process.
Now, when you guys, go ahead, Peter.
I was just going to say that, you know, one of Yogananda's great quotes is that, you know, the ideal future would be a combination of the ancient wisdom of the East and the modern advancements in technological material progress of the West. You know, this idea of synthesis, that we're so skewed towards the material paradigm now. I mean, in terms of the message that was blasting across all the media channels and everything is buy, me, more, acquire, you know, that's your, right. that's where you can get your contentment. And yet there are these ancient teachings that are so much more profound and ultimately lead to a much more content state of being. And if we can balance the two, you know, then we really have hope here in the future. So that was a really attractive aspect of his message, and, you know, one of the things that we wanted to bring in to the film.
And I think that nowadays there is definitely something changing. I mean, from the time that where he was around to the point now where meditation is now not a weird thing. You know, yoga is not a weird thing. It is in some parts of the country, but in a lot of places, it's still something that's spoken of, and that's basically from his genesis, from the work that he put in. So. Again, I think the undertaking of what you guys were going after was pretty massive, pressure-wise.
It was a huge challenge, and I think that not knowing or understanding quite the pressure that we were under, there was you know, like a saying, ignorance is bliss. I think that that's the only way you get through these things, right? They say it's like childbirth. You shouldn't know what that's like because you won't do it.
You will never have children if you actually knew what was going to happen.
Yeah. So, and I think that the challenge was also, I mean, the three of us very often sat in the editing room really grappling with, you know, some of the biggest questions in life, you know, about the human condition. And just, it was great to have different points of view, and we were all bringing different things into that as our entry point.
Now, what is your process when you do a pre-production on a documentary? Since I know the narrative pre-production process, I have no clue of the documentary process. How do you how long is pre-production? What do you do? What's the process?
It really depends on the film. I look at each film as its own, has its own identity, has its own needs, you know, and you really look at the needs of the film. But in general, there's, you know, a pretty hefty research process. You really need to go into understanding the subject that you're researching, and to read and to take in information, to organize that information. But at the same time, you're really coming, what you're doing while you're doing all of that is you're gestating this process of what is the narrative that's trying to be told. I look at it as, for me, projects often are choosing me. Even if I think I'm choosing them, like with Speaking in Strings, my first film, but really it was choosing me because it was trying to draw out from me something that I had to experience and go through. Mm-hmm. See what I'm saying? And I really believe that that's so much what the creative process is really all about. So, you end up just bowing to it. You do your research and you're trying to, at the same time, put your antennas up and listen and receive what the message is or what is that narrative that's trying to unfold here. Mm-hmm. And in this case, we put together a treatment. It was a massive, thing to try to put this together. Yeah. And so, we did about 6 months of a R&D phase.
We literally call it an R&D phase. And we've done that on several projects now. It's such a sort of a healthy way of jumping in, which is, okay, for the next 3 to 6 months, we're just exploring. We're going to do some exploratory shooting. We'll do a couple of interviews, maybe shoot some sequences. We're also going to do, hire a team and start getting in there and, doing research and archival research. And then we're going to start creating a palette of what this film could be and, start to, as Paola says, what is the film that is wanting to emerge? And one of the things, Paola has been a great teacher to me in all of this. Since I started in the narrative form where you begin with the script. Here's the script. Now we're going to go make the movie, and here's the template. Here's the blueprint for the movie. Well, in documentaries, it's the exact reverse, which is the script is you write on the timeline as you edit. And, the organization kept asking us for a script. In fact, I think we even had a contractual obligation to produce a script, and we're like, we're not writing a script. The script will be the transcript of the final cut. When we have locked cut, we can transcribe it, and that will be your script, because the film needs to be discovered. For it to be authentic, it needs to be found.
There are different ways to do it. I mean, if you're cranking out documentaries for TV and stuff, you mm-hmm. just script and you're using B-roll, But I think that this was more of an exploratory process, and we went from treatment to outline to discovering the language of the film on the timeline. All right. And then actually starting to create cuts.
Now, one of the things I loved about the movie too is the reenactments are so beautifully done, and they're so wonderfully placed throughout the story. How important do you think that is in your process, and it's something that more documentaries should have? Because I always love reenactments when they're done well, when they're shot well. I've seen some that haven't been shot that well, but if you shoot them well.
Saying that is so awesome that you appreciated them. I mean, it was actually a big battle to get the reenactments done.
Really? In what way?
Well, in other words, we weren't really in agreement as a team on whether to go down that route. So it was a little bit of like trial and error convincing. And I think that here's the deal. You have to feel, we were trying to make an unconventional biography, right? That's why there are two things that felt to me like the language of the film that would help us really feel mm-hmm. The presence of Yogananda. Right. And that was to really feel the presence of him as a boy, that one, the seeker, the one that hadn't been realized, the one that was just still going into, saints' homes in Calcutta and trying to get the wisdom and trying to find, he's so hungry for the wisdom. The seeking part of him, we really wanted to be able to show that, to express that, to manifest that in some way on the screen. And then his voice, it was trying to really harness his voice. I couldn't believe that, how many people do you know that remember when they were born? They remember going through the womb. Mm. They remember how, Luna. They remember how, they actually felt coming through the womb, and were cognizant of the feeling torn between two worlds, be it spirit and being material in the material world. Right. So those two things, finding his voice and using recreations, to me were two tools that we could use to help the audience really feel that they were in the presence of Yogananda.
And that's something that really I reacted to that when I watched it, because I did feel that. And I've seen the movie a bunch of times now, and every time when I hear that voice and I see those images, it really does. It just brings the whole thing together in a way that just not interviews and B-roll would have done.
And we didn't really have a choice in the matter. You know, there's only like, what is it, a dozen photographs at most of him in his youth and his family or whatever. Right. And, you know, it's a visual medium. So we needed some method to tell the story. And, you know, we talked about metaphors and visual metaphors. You know,
right.
we talked about all sorts of ways. How do you convey a feeling? How do you convey a feeling of longing, you know? And ultimately, you know, you do need actors and you know, you need to look into people's eyes and have, you know, convey that feeling. But, you know, as you said, Alex, when recreations are good, they're fantastic, and when they're bad, they're so horrible.
And there was the risk. There was the risk of it being bad, you know. Right. So that was the thing. You just had to have a lot of, you know, to see it and then just really try to realize. And Arlene Nelson, our DP, I mean, I have to say, I just hand it to her, because it was just she really got that. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we treated them and did all these things in post as well. And, you know, we just had a really great team of people that helped us realize them in the way that you know, we really envisioned it.
We studied a lot of films, you know. One of the films that inspired us was Man on Wire. Like what
a great movie. Oh,
I mean,
movie.
It really makes the film. So it was those really well done recreations was our point of, you know, that's what was our aspiration.
And the magical realism, I think, came from a Spanish film that Lisa had found, The Beehive, Something of the Beehive. Do you remember the title of that?
Spirit of the Beehive.
Spirit of the Beehive.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful film. And it kind of had a language of very, very subtle magical realism. And so, you know, that was a really great resource that we used as well. Yeah.
Very cool. Now you got the movie done. Now, I'm assuming you guys were thinking about marketing and distribution and how to sell this movie during the process, or I have to believe you were doing it during the process, as opposed to at the end going, okay, now what? What was the marketing plan? What was the distribution plan to get this out there into the world?
So we were blessed with making a product in which we had a very clearly identifiable core audience. Mm-hmm. You know, we had Yogananda devotees, and there are, you know, by some estimates, around 300,000 people worldwide who consider Yogananda to be their guru and are very, very devoted to his teachings and his message. And then there's another number that we sometimes reference, which is, you know, the number of people who have read the book, which is around 30 million. So we had a target. We wanted, the sweet spot was between the 300,000 and the 30 million. Somewhere in there was going to be our audience. And we had to figure out, you know, how to reach them. And we considered, you know.
But the goal was to go beyond that crowd.
Yeah,
so
of course.
In all fairness, it was really our mission was to make a film that went beyond that crowd, not to alienate that crowd, but to go beyond that. And so we were really looking at the number of people practicing yoga. And you know, we had the statistics of how many people were practicing yoga just in the U.S.
A couple.
A couple, 20 million or so.
Back then.
It
was around 20 million.
And now we have we have these statistics worldwide, which, you know, are above 350 million. Mm-hmm. So, you know, there were those numbers that we knew if we could just tap into even just like 1% of that, you know, we would have an audience.
And, you know, while we considered very briefly, actually, you know, going with a traditional distributor and sort of handing the film over, Paola, you know, on a previous film, we had consulted with this gentleman named Peter Broderick, who coined the term hybrid distribution. And, you know, he's been talking about it for 20 odd years now. And we realized that this was kind of the perfect film to do that. So we decided pretty early on to self-distribute, that we would, you know, carve out rights, you know, separate out all our rights and kind of window them out in a sequence that made sense for us, assemble a team. We had around 20 people on our distribution team that we were basically managing, you know, on a standing weekly call. And we created a distribution plan, a strategy of how we were going to roll out these various windows and take advantage of, you know, what Paola was saying before is, okay, so you identify your core, but then there are these concentric circles or a Venn diagram of overlapping circles. So you got your Yogananda devotees, you've got your meditators, you've got your wellness community, you've got this. How are we going to get to them all? And how, are we going to go, from town to town and roll out? And so, in other words, it was something where it was kind of a yogic distribution plan because we were learning about it as we were doing it. It was really amazing.
And how did you guys do? Because I remember when we spoke before, you were talking about your theatrical, which I thought was very interesting, the way that you guys released your theatrical. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, I just want to also say that we were realistic about the fact that it would probably be challenging to get this film distributed through a traditional distributor.
They would have no idea what to do with it.
Exactly. So, I think it's important to kind of just start with that. And because I think that when you make a film, you kind of need to know already, number one, who your audience is. You're working backwards in a way, just strategically, if you really want to get it seen. And then, you have to know what you have in your hands. And we were playing with something that really hadn't been done before. And so, we were prepared to take this route. We had talked about taking this route of, doing the hybrid distribution model. And the advice, that we were getting from Peter, who's, I really love the strategy that he has, which is dipping your toe into, a market. So starting with New York, we actually four-walled in New York and Los Angeles.
Can you explain to the audience what four-walling is?
Sure. So what we did was, the first thing we did was we identified which dozen cities have the most concentration of our core audience, in America. And that's where we're going to start. And so New York was one of them, Los Angeles, obviously, Encinitas, where, Yogananda had an ashram. There was a couple of other places, Northern California. And four-walling is where you basically you rent the theater for a week. You rent the right to show your film for four showings a day for an entire week's run. And in a place like New York, that will cost you around $10,000. But if you can fill those seats, you can actually make a lot of money doing that. And we did. In New York, I believe we made $34,000 in that first week. So we had a $24,000 profit just from that one engagement. And then the theater held us over. They said, oh my God, this film is really performing. I want to book this film. So we ended up staying another 6 weeks beyond that in New York.
Without having to pay for it. They actually booked it traditionally.
Exactly. It turned into a traditional booking. Same thing happened in LA and a couple of other markets. In fact, unbelievably, we played 23 weeks at the Lemleys in Pasadena in LA. 23 weeks.
On Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, it was just on weekends.
People just kept coming, so they just kept it going. And on a Sunday afternoon, it was just great. Yeah.
So you did all of that without thinking, well, you decided to spend the time to do the theatrical run first. And then you were going to roll it out. So what was the next rollouts? Because you didn't do everything at the same time, obviously.
Actually, can I back up
Please.
A little bit before theatrical, which is even before theatrical, we started to create buzz and awareness. We attended a couple of conferences, for instance, Wisdom 2.0 in the Bay Area, where high tech meets higher consciousness. And we figured, this is ground zero for us, especially with the whole Steve Jobs connection. Right. So we convinced the organization to give us 500 copies of the autobiography for free, which we just gave out at that conference. We had a big display, stacking the books with our postcard in the book and, our film postcard in the book. And it says, this is the book that Steve Jobs had on his iPad at the time he died, and it's yours for free. And they just went like gangbusters.
Of course.
We did the same thing at the Yoga Journal conference in San Diego. And we were basically getting to, sort of celebrity, yoga teachers and trying to get them interested in the film. And then they started telling their classes about it.
So it was kind of considered grassroots in a way. Mm-hmm. We were doing pre-screenings to kind of create buzz.
Mm-hmm. We also did Bhakti Fest in Joshua Tree in September. And coincidentally, the Smithsonian was having a traveling exhibition on yoga and the ancient teachings, and we just pigtailed onto that.
The timing was amazing. I do have to say timing is everything. And this movie took a long time to make, and we kept asking ourselves, why is it taking so long? Why is it taking so long? And, just the kinds of things that happened in that time that it got extended were the things that helped mobilize the film when it went into distribution. But go back to like because he's asking what we were doing, theatrical on demand along with.
Right. So in addition to traditional theatrical, some of it four-walling, some of it, bookings, the numbers in New York made everyone suddenly look at us and want to book us. So we started to get incoming calls, which was fantastic. And we had Richard Abramowitz of Abramorama was our theatrical booker and did a fantastic job. Concurrent with this, we were also doing what's called theatrical on demand, which is how it's like Uber meets, indie film distribution, which is you can actually get an AMC to show your movie on a Tuesday because they're going to make more money if you guarantee them $700 for that 8 o'clock screening than if they show, the rerun of or whatever, the remake of some blockbuster that's only going to have 20 people in the audience. So you can actually get your film into practically any theater in America if you get enough people to pre-reserve tickets. And they have an algorithm and a widget that fits right on your website. We used a company called Gather, and there's another company called Tug that allow you to, really get your film. It's all these cool disruptive distribution techniques where you can get straight to your audience, cut out the middleman, and you get your data. You get the email addresses of all those people who showed up. And then you can market your ancillaries and your other, components to that list. And that becomes a very useful list. So we had theatrical on demand, and community screenings. We were also selling DVDs to show in your churches or your yoga studios. And we were just pushing them out on a grassroots level.
But this is before a massive release on DVD or on SVOD, right? This is way before.
Almost 1 year of this.
Okay.
Theatrical on demand, and community screenings.
Community screenings, yeah.
So.
And then I'm assuming during that process alone, the movie got into the black, or were you still in the red before you even got to SVOD?
Well, it did very well. We're under sort of an NDA. We can't really disclose numbers.
Fair enough.
It did very well. It exceeded everyone's expectations. We were in 65 markets theatrically, 65 markets in North America. We had 350 theatrical on demand screenings, and also overseas was crazy. In 7 countries, we were in 50 plus theaters for an indie doc. Yeah.
So it wasn't, it definitely exceeded our expectation because most documentaries don't really do this kind of numbers in theaters. So, we figured that TV was not going to be probably one of our windows. So we really milked the theatrical, and because the theatrical worked, it really helped with the DVD sales as well.
Of course.
So then, Netflix came around and kicked the tires.
As they do.
And, there's a love-hate thing with Netflix and indie filmmakers. But back then it was thrilling to be, in acquisition talks with Netflix, licensing talks. What was great, though, is that we delayed that deal. We said, we're in no hurry to make that deal. Let's keep showing them the legs that this movie has. And between their first offer and, whatever it was, a few months later when we finally closed the deal, they had quadrupled their offer on Netflix had. And what was more important is that they agreed to the following windowing. We said, we're going to do DVDs first, digital second, and Netflix third. And even in the DVD deals that we made, we had a deal with Kino Lorber to do brick and mortar DVDs, but we had a co-exclusive deal, which is we were allowed to sell our own DVDs too. And Self-Realization Fellowship, Yogananda's organization, has a whole publishing arm where they sell books and DVDs. So we created a companion book, we created our own DVDs, and we basically began with our exclusive window. For 1 month, it was if you wanted to buy the film, you could only buy it from us. Then Kino Lorber kicked in, then digital, then Netflix.
Super smart, guys. It's super.
We had help from people like Peter Broderick. We had consultants that we were working with.
But because you had a product that was in demand. So this doesn't work for every movie. Like this works for films that have an audience that really want that material. Because like when I heard about it, it was already on. I think the first time I saw it was on Netflix. the first time I ever heard of it. But I could only imagine if I would have known about it prior, I would have probably been like, when can I see it? When can I see it? Where can I see it? Where can I see it? When I can see it? So that kind of want and need by the audience is what makes this kind of platform work.
Yeah.
Without question. Now, as far as marketing, did you market on digital? Did you go social media? Did you do big billboards? How did you market this to those audiences?
That would have been cool, right? The billboards.
Right. Wouldn't that be amazing? Just like driving on like...
that we wanted to see Yogananda, up on billboards.
On Sunset Boulevard, just right there.
Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah. You want to talk about our marketing?
Well, yeah. I mean, we quickly realized that, this was not a traditional film, and we were going to be connecting with our audience in this sort of disruptive, direct way. So obviously, social media was our main friend here. We did, do a few print ads here and there, but they were mostly strategic partnerships. So, for instance, Yoga Journal and LA Yoga was one of our partners, where we said, okay, we had these really good marketing consultants who said, let's make a creative deal with LA Yoga. One, let's get them to review the film. Two, let's get buy a one-page ad in the magazine, same issue that they're reviewing. And three, let's get them to host one of the evenings in LA. So in the cities where we were forewalling the film, we would get partner hosts to say, you get the 8 o'clock screening. You can do whatever you want with it. You can do a little presentation afterwards. As long as you broadcast your list and fill that house, it's yours. And by doing that, we basically just guaranteed a bunch of sellouts and got really robust numbers.
Yeah.
So,
and that's something that has worked also with some of our clients, our consulting clients, because that is something that's kind of your grassroots build. I think if you mobilize, it takes a lot of work to do this kind of stuff, and we don't recommend to people that they do it on their own. It will totally wipe you out and exhaust you. You need a team, and so you have to actually build this into your budget. You need, a few assistants, you need a social media team, you need publicists, you need marketing people. You really need to create what a distributor would create. And the difference is that you're handpicking it, and this is your baby. So you're going to really go the extra mile that your distributor may or may not do if they don't get immediate results, right? So it's the consistency with which you will shepherd and nurture your film into the world. That's the idea behind the hybrid distribution model.
And I think with this kind of film, it is a poster child for self-distribution. I mean, it has everything that a self-distributed film needs to have in order to succeed. Because I consult all the time, and a lot of times they just don't have an audience or know how to get to that audience or have a strategy, and they're just like, well, I'm going to put it up on iTunes and that's enough. I'm like, no.
Everybody should have Yogananda in their film.
That's the secret.
That is the key. That's the key to every successful film, obviously.
Another thing, Alex, is that we had two Facebook pages. One was sort of public-facing, open page, which started, really to mushroom and get a lot of traction. And, our social media team was really good at sort of organically building a really robust group.
Mocha Media.
But, Mocha Media, Glenn and Angela Alston. And the other thing, though, is that we had a private page that was only by invitation. And that was for movie captains or anyone who was willing to spearhead a community screening or a theatrical on-demand screening. And you were only invited into that group after you had, initiated a screening request in your community. And then in that group, we gave you all the kind of secret sauce stuff, like the playbook and the flyers and the templates. And you would also be able to engage with other captains and share secrets and share lists. And, hey, you help me promote in this city and I'll help you promote in that city.
And do they get a cut of that, or is this just pure love?
Not in the gather.
They can gather. Yeah,
not in the gather model. In Tug, they are given 5%, but in the gather model, it's really just for the love and the bragging rights of having pulled off the screening and stuff like that.
In your neighborhood or in your town.
Yeah, I mean, it is a pretty cool thing if there's a film that isn't going to ever come to your town and you get to actually host a big party. You just have to get people there, but you can do what you want. Like they come, you can speak to your audience, it kind of is your own little personal party.
And did you guys go on tour with this?
No.
You guys, like in the movie in general, did you go to different cities and talk? Or
A couple of things here and there, but mostly we were pretty much delegating it to.
We did a lot of, actually, you know what? We did do a lot of Skype and Zoom calls we did do, but we didn't actually go on tour with all the, you know, we just couldn't. We were so tired from having done all of this. We're like, we'll Zoom in, you know.
Yeah, we'll Skype it in, guys. That's fine. It's perfectly fine. Now, so when you release it, you released TVOD first, right? Transactional first. Mm-hmm. Then you had your Netflix deal, and that Netflix deal lasted, what, a couple years, if I'm not mistaken?
It was a 2-year deal, and now we're in our second SVOD, which is Gaia. Now has bought it, you know, for a second run of subscription VOD. So. And
then that's locked up for a few years, and then and you're still selling DVDs?
Yeah.
Yep. We're still actually having theatrical screenings. Like 2 weeks ago, someone said, I want to do theatrical screenings.
Really? Yeah. Well, it's one of those movies that makes, like, you want a community. You want that communal experience to watch that kind of movie.
Well, you know, that's right. And I think that one of the things, this is a lesson for, you know, our business. Because, you know, distribution, distributors, we tend to put blinders on and say, this is the only thing that will sell, right? But if you do find your own audience, like what we found is that this audience that came to see Awake is actually a vast audience all around the world. They are hungry for a certain kind of product that isn't really being produced and isn't being distributed, which is part of the reason why we really wanted to help other films get off the ground in this arena, because you know there is room for this. Not only is there room for it, there's a demand for it. So, you know, you just have to find your way into that distribution model, and then the rest come.
Now, and you guys did create ancillary products, which I purchased the book. I definitely purchased the book. I love the companion book. I haven't bought a companion book in God knows how many years. I think The Matrix was the last.
That wasn't cheap. That was nice of you.
No, it's because I just love the movie so much, and I was like, I want something else. And my daughters got it for me for Christmas last year. And how did you guys go about that? Was it because of through a self-realization company that they had their arm and they had their marketing to do it?
I think also it was actually inspired by a review. I believe, you know, the Washington Post gave us this really juicy, quotable little line, which it said that Paola and Lisa were masters of atmospherics, that they were masters of atmospherics. And we realized that there was sort of a quality, this magical realism thing, you know, that was in the movie. And there was a monastic at Self-Realization Fellowship who was kind of a Photoshop whiz. And he just started doing these page layouts, which was capturing the feeling of the film, you know, in this other form. And we realized, boy, there's a making of a book here. We can basically have the transcript of the film. Then we wrote some, you know, introductory essays and some sort of epilogue essays, you know, to sort of bookend it. And it became this kind of beautiful product.
He did an amazing job. I mean, yeah.
It's a beautiful book. It's a stunning coffee table book. It was really well done. And did it do well? Did you guys sell a lot of books?
It did very well. It did very well.
That's amazing. Because like you said, it's not cheap. It's not a cheap gift. And then one other thing I want to talk about the soundtrack of the movie, because you actually sold the soundtrack. But when I'm listening towards the end, I'm like, is that Alanis Morissette? I'm like, how did they get Alanis Morissette for this? How did you get Alanis to get the rights to that movie?
So amazing. Thank you, Alanis. She had given me a song of hers in one of my prior films. And I'd written to her, and, you know, she was like, I'm not really sure how you see that being used, but, you know, she gave it to me anyway, and I used it. And I think in the end, it just worked so perfectly. And with this, I just remember I was going on walks and listening to all kinds of music that would spark something for the movie. And that song still is so beautiful.
I remember when it came out.
It's so beautiful. Song. And she is so, you know, deeply attuned to these teachings. And, you know, it's in all of her music. I mean, she is like a teacher in her own right. And I think she's actually teaching, you know, spiritual, giving conferences and and she's a spiritual teacher in her own right. So I think that she understood the connection with the film. She was just generous.
Mm-hmm.
And
but you just wrote a letter. Originally, you just wrote a letter to her and said, "Hey."
Wrote a letter, and you know, little persistence.
We also got a number one.
It doesn't just happen like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, and then we also got, you know, a number one hit single from George Harrison. Right. Olivia Harrison, you know, was generous enough to give us the use of George's song, and you know, that's kind of a 1-2 punch at the end of the film, which is, you know, in Still, she's kind of singing from the point of view of God, singing down to humanity, which is, I love you still. No matter what you do, no matter all these things you mess up, I love you still. Mm-hmm. So here's God singing down to humans. And then, you know, we go, our end credits, we have this exalted, give me love, give me peace on earth, man singing up to God, you know, so beautiful, those two songs back to back.
Yeah, and Still also has the metaphor of stillness, you know, in all of it too. So it's the persistence and the perseverance of that sort of self-realization, but it's also just, you know, you find it in stillness, you know. So, and it's funny, now that you mention it, I realized that I actually kind of stalked her. I knew she was, I'm remembering now
at
that
Wisdom
2.0
at the conference
where we were giving away those autobiographies, she was one of the speakers. And so I, through 6 Degrees of Separation, had a connection through my friend Nell to Alanis. And, you know, Nell was like giving her the you know, it was like a little connected tissue to her at Wisdom 2.0, where, you know, she texted me and said, come say hi, I'm leaving now. She left from her thing. I had to catch her like in her limo on her way out just to say hello.
Nice.
But I think cinched the deal.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Another thing about Still is that you know, one of the monastics who was part of the film team is actually, you know, a kirtan singer, and he just loves music and is very steeped in traditional classical Indian music. And he pointed out the fact that that song is actually in a traditional rag form. It is in a rag. I forgot the name of the rag, but you know, she was clearly influenced by India.
Yeah.
You know.
That's amazing. No, so what's up next? What's next for you two guys?
This is a good one.
Well, the movie was made and released in 2014. So we've worked on other things since then, and we are working on a big project right now that's a peace and music festival in India, in Rishikesh, India, and it will have a documentary component to it and a live stream, and it will hopefully be another uplifting focal point.
That's awesome.
It's called Come Together. It's called Come Together in honor of commemorating the Beatles going to India 50 years ago, and how they moved the needle and shifted the paradigm for so many of us, you know, just opened those doors to kind of a new way of thinking.
I mean, no, when the Beatles went over there, I did absolutely, like, you know, because you had the biggest band ever introduce you to a whole new world in many ways.
At the height of their career, at the peak of their career.
And I think the idea is that, you know, they had everything, right? They had reached the pinnacle of success, and for them it wasn't really enough. And so it was the idea that, you know, finding another way to explore our purpose in life and finding balance in life. Mm-hmm. So it's really putting a focal point on how to live on the planet.
That's awesome. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all my guests. First one is, what advice would you give a filmmaker wanting to break into the business today?
Jump in. Shoot it on your phone. You know, these days the barriers to entry have disappeared. You can edit it on your laptop. You can shoot it on your phone. Jump in, start, do it, and see if you really want to do it, because it takes a huge amount of work. So figure it out. Figure it out by doing it. And the other one is, don't go to film school.
Especially not Harvard Film School. I mean, seriously.
Don't waste all that money on film school. Learn about life. Study philosophy. Join the Merchant Marine. That's what John Huston always said. Join the Merchant Marine. You want to be a filmmaker? Go visit. You know, learn about the world, and then you can anyone can figure out how to make a film.
And I think for me, it's you know, there's so much emphasis now in the result. And I think it's really impacting process. Mm-hmm. And I just think that, I'm looking to young filmmakers to find a new language, to find new stories, to, really break the mold here. And I just think that, don't be result oriented. Let the process, if you're drawn to filmmaking, it's because you're really needing to have expression and a voice, and you have something to say. So have something to say. That's kind of where I put the focus in having something to say.
Now, can you tell me the book that had the biggest impact on your life or career?
Ooh, interesting. I mean, I don't know about if I could say it had an impact on my career, but a book that has always stayed with me is The Grapes of Wrath. Wow, by Steinbeck.
Yeah, of course.
The journey talk about a path, and it's a metaphor for the path of life. Mm-hmm. It just was such a journey of survival and love and finding a way forward with such elegance and grace and depth. So that movie has always stuck with me. That book. And I actually haven't seen the movie, but the book really stuck with me. And I don't know if it influenced my filmmaking, but it influenced me as a person. So of course it influenced my filmmaking.
How about you, Peter?
I'm just going to plug, I'm so sorry to do this, but I'm going to plug my book. I have a book out right now.
Plug it.
To the Gods.
What's it called?
It's called Playing to the Gods. And, I spent the last 3 to 5 years on it. It actually started as a script. It's got a long story. But anyway, it's a book now. It's on out from Simon & Schuster, and it's about the birth of modern acting. A great rivalry occurred about 100 years ago in the theater between these two icons. One is Sarah Bernhardt, the great actress of the 19th century, who acted from the outside in. She acted by imitation. There were books, there were manuals that showed you how to pose on any given line. And then there was this sea change, which is we needed to figure out the original way of acting, which is inspiration from inside out. And this other actress, Eleanor Aduza, kind of rediscovered original acting. And they had this intense rivalry that went on for decades. They stole each other's plays and lovers and all sorts of things. So
you did a great job.
It would make a good movie.
It's on its way.
A good movie.
Yeah, it's being adapted as we speak.
Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
Love myself.
Oh, that's a good one. We beat ourselves up a little bit too much sometimes.
Yeah, it's just it's the thing that these teachings have really transformed in me, which is just to surrender and to allow, and that has a lot to do with loving yourself.
How about you, Peter?
I would say, yeah, and kind of related to that, kind of get out of the way. Get out of the way. And let it happen without the ego. That's a tricky one. I'm still working on that one.
And the toughest question of all, 3 of your favorite films of all time.
Well, I always begin with The Godfather. It's still
mine too. Okay. It's still on my list.
Yeah.
What else do we have? I grew up in Italy, so I'll go to Bertolucci, 1900, or certainly some of the Fellini movies that were so influential. Amarcord, Roma, Casanova. I've seen them all. Just an amazing filmmaker.
How about you, Paola?
Well, 2 documentaries that really had an imprint on me were Crumb and
I love Crumb. Love Crumb.
And Harlan County, USA.
Oh yeah, that's a good movie.
And I would say The Princess Bride.
What a classic movie! Oh,
love that movie.
It's so wonderful, that film. And then, where can people follow your work and follow what you guys are doing?
Our website is thisiscounterpointfilms.com.
Okay.
Because there's another Counterpoint Films in Ireland, I think. But ours
this
is Counterpoint Films. And we got some.
We
stuff
have a
up
newsletter, and so that's the best place if you sign up for the newsletter. We don't send many out, so it won't be annoying. But that's the best way to do that.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to the tribe today and really share your process and a little bit of Yogananda's wisdom with everyone. So thank you again so much.
Thank you so much
welcome.
for the opportunity.
It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure.